The Coddling of the American Mind by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. Picture this. You walk into a room at Brown University, one of America's elite institutions, expecting to find students debating the great questions of our time. Instead, you're greeted by coloring books, bubbles, plates of cookies, and a screen playing videos of adorable puppies tumbling over each other. This isn't a daycare center. These comforts weren't set up for 5-year-olds having a rough day. They were created for college students who felt they needed protection from something truly terrifying: a debate. Just a simple campus discussion about feminism between two authors with different perspectives. Some students were so concerned that hearing opposing viewpoints might emotionally harm them that they created this safe space to recover. One student who retreated there later explained, "I was feeling bombarded by a lot of viewpoints that really go against my dearly and closely held beliefs." If this sounds surreal, you're not alone in thinking so. But here's the thing. This bizarre scene is just the visible tip of a massive iceberg lurking beneath the surface of modern culture. Something strange has been brewing on college campuses over the past decade, and it's now seeping into our workplaces, our politics, and our everyday conversations. We're witnessing students protesting not to demand freedom of speech, but to suppress it. New terms like microaggressions, trigger warnings, and safe spaces have exploded into our vocabulary, leaving older folks scratching their heads and younger people feeling like they're walking through a minefield of potential offense. Meanwhile, beneath all this cultural chaos, a genuine mental health crisis is unfolding. Rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide among teenagers have rocketed to unprecedented levels. So what on earth is happening? This is the urgent question at the heart of a truly groundbreaking book called The Coddling of the American Mind. The authors, Greg Lukianoff, a First Amendment lawyer, and Jonathan Haidt, a celebrated social psychologist, aren't here to bash an entire generation. Instead, they've crafted a compassionate, thoroughly researched investigation into a set of seductive but dangerous ideas that have begun to reshape our culture. Their argument is both startling and sympathetic. With the very best intentions, we've started raising our children in ways that are actually setting them up to fail. By the time we finish this journey together, you'll understand the 3 great untruths that are quietly reshaping how we think. You'll see the hidden forces, from parenting styles to political trends to the phones in our pockets, that have created what the authors call a culture of safety ISM. Most importantly, you'll discover timeless principles and practical wisdom that can help you become stronger, more resilient, and better equipped to flourish in a world that's certainly challenging, but also brimming with possibility. This isn't just about understanding a book, it's about understanding your own mind and how to navigate the bewildering world we're living in right now. You know that old saying, prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child? It's one of those simple pieces of folk wisdom that somehow captures a deep truth about life. The world is unpredictable and messy. It throws curveballs, creates detours, and plants obstacles right in your path. The best way to help someone succeed isn't to clear every pebble from their journey, but to equip them with the skills, strength, and confidence to handle whatever life throws at them. But here's the problem. Over recent decades, we've been doing exactly the opposite. And that's where Lukianoff and Haidt begin their story. They introduce us to 3 seductive but fundamentally flawed ideas, 3 great untruths that have spread through our culture like wildfire. These ideas often come from a place of genuine care, but they're creating consequences nobody intended. The first is what they call the untruth of fragility. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. This flips Friedrich Nietzsche's famous line, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger," completely on its head. To explain this, The authors start with a fascinating real-world mystery. Back in the 1990s, doctors noticed something alarming. Peanut allergies in children were skyrocketing. Nobody understood why, but the response seemed perfectly reasonable. Protect kids from peanuts at all costs. Schools created elaborate nut-free zones. Parents panicked at the thought of their children being anywhere near peanut dust. But despite all these precautions, the allergies just kept getting worse and worse. Then came a breakthrough. In 2015, a landmark study revealed something nobody expected. The very act of protecting children from peanuts was actually causing the allergy epidemic. Here's what researchers discovered. The human immune system isn't a delicate teacup that shatters the moment it encounters something challenging. It's a learning system. It needs exposure to all sorts of substances early in life to figure out what's genuinely dangerous and what's completely harmless. By keeping kids away from peanuts, parents were essentially teaching their children's immune systems to overreact, to treat a harmless protein like a deadly invader. Now here's where it gets interesting. Our minds, our emotions, and our character work exactly the same way. The authors introduced this brilliant concept from writer Nassim Nicholas Taleb called anti-fragility. Think about it this way. Some things in life are fragile, like a glass vase. Drop it, and it shatters. Other things are resilient, like a plastic cup. You can drop it repeatedly without breaking it, but it doesn't improve from the experience. But the most important systems in nature are anti-fragile. They don't just survive stress. They actually require challenges, setbacks, and even small failures to learn, adapt, and grow stronger. Your bones and muscles are anti-fragile. They literally weaken without the stress of exercise. And guess what? Your mind is anti-fragile too. Taleb uses this beautiful metaphor. Wind extinguishes a candle but energizes a fire. The goal of parenting and education shouldn't be to turn our children into fragile candles. It should be to help them become roaring fires that welcome the wind. But we've drifted into what the authors call a culture of safety ISM, where the definition of safety has expanded way beyond physical safety to include emotional safety. This subtle shift, which they call concept creep, means we now treat uncomfortable ideas, offensive words, and challenging experiences as if they're actual physical dangers that young people need protection from. This is exactly the thinking that creates safe spaces with puppy videos for college students facing a simple debate. The intention is compassionate, but the effect is devastating. It reinforces the untruth of fragility, essentially teaching an entire generation that they're too weak and delicate to handle disagreement. This leads us straight into the second dangerous idea, the untruth of emotional reasoning. Always trust your feelings. At first glance, this sounds like solid advice. We're constantly told to follow our heart or trust our gut. But here's where ancient wisdom from around the world, from the Stoic philosophers of Greece to Buddhist teachings from India, tells us something radically different. Epictetus, the Greek Stoic philosopher, put it perfectly. It is not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance. In other words, your feelings aren't direct, accurate readouts of reality. They're reactions to your thoughts about reality, and those thoughts can be seriously distorted. Jonathan Haidt uses this fantastic metaphor to explain how the mind works. Imagine a small rider sitting atop a giant elephant. The rider represents your conscious, rational mind, the part that thinks in words and makes logical plans. The elephant represents everything else, the other 99% of your mental processing, your intuitions, your gut reactions, your automatic responses. The rider can try to steer the elephant, but when they disagree, the elephant almost always wins. Emotional reasoning happens when the writer, instead of questioning where the elephant wants to go, simply becomes the elephant's lawyer, inventing clever justifications for whatever the elephant already feels. This is the core mechanism behind anxiety and depression. The authors explain that the most effective treatment for these conditions is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Think of CBT as a training manual that teaches the writer how to communicate with and gradually retrain the elephant. It teaches you to spot common cognitive distortions, which are patterns of irrational thinking that amplify negative emotions. These include things like catastrophizing, where you take a small setback and imagine the absolute worst outcome. I failed this quiz, so I'll fail the entire class, drop out of college, and my life will be completely ruined. There's also black and white thinking, where you see everything in extreme terms. If I'm not a total success, then I'm a complete failure. And mind reading, where you assume you know what others are thinking, usually something negative. He definitely thinks I'm an idiot. Here's the troubling part. The authors argue that a new culture on college campuses is accidentally teaching students to engage in precisely these cognitive distortions. Take the concept of microaggressions, for example. The term refers to small, everyday slights, often completely unintentional, that can communicate hostile messages to people from marginalized groups. Now, subtle prejudice is absolutely real and can be genuinely hurtful, but the way microaggressions are often taught encourages students to interpret ambiguous situations in the least charitable way possible. It trains them to engage in mind reading and assume negative intent. It represents a fundamental shift from judging people by what they meant to say to judging them purely by how their words made someone feel. To illustrate a healthier approach, the authors share the powerful story of Kareth Foster, a black comedian married to a white man. Her husband was in a devastating motorcycle accident, and in the chaos of the emergency room, the all-white hospital staff kept asking her, in what felt like a dismissive tone, what her relationship was to the patient. Her immediate reaction, her elephant's gut response, was pure outrage. She thought, "Am I seriously dealing with racist nonsense right now, at a time like this?" But then her rational mind, took control. She realized the intense stress of the moment might be coloring how she interpreted their questions. Instead of lashing out, she took a deep breath, kept the lines of communication open, and focused entirely on helping her husband. Her whole demeanor shifted, the staff's attitude toward her softened, and she later realized what she'd experienced wasn't malice at all. It was just a group of stressed professionals whose default mental image of a married couple didn't happen to look like her and her husband. By questioning her initial emotional reaction, she avoided making an already terrible situation even worse. This is the exact opposite of emotional reasoning in action. The third and final dangerous idea is the untruth of us versus them. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. The human mind evolved for tribal living. We're literally hardwired to form groups, to cooperate intensely with our us, and to view them with suspicion. Social psychologists have demonstrated you can create powerful in-group loyalty and out-group hostility in just minutes by dividing people into groups based on something as meaningless as a coin flip. This tribal instinct runs deep in our nature. As the authors put it, morality binds and blinds. It binds us tightly together with our team, but it blinds us to the humanity of people on the other side, and to the serious flaws in our own team's thinking. The authors argue there are two fundamentally different ways to practice identity politics. The first is what they call common humanity identity politics. This was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s approach. He didn't demonize his opponents. Instead, he appealed to the shared values and common humanity of all Americans. He drew a larger circle to include everyone, famously declaring, "Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." But there's another kind, common enemy identity politics. This approach unites a group not by appealing to what we share, but by focusing on a shared hatred of a common enemy. It shrinks the circle and cranks up the tribalism. The authors argue that certain interpretations of modern academic theories, like intersectionality, can inadvertently promote this worldview. When life gets framed as a perpetual struggle between groups defined solely by their privilege or oppression, where one group is inherently good and the other inherently bad, you've created the perfect recipe for intense us versus them thinking. This mindset explains some truly shocking student reactions to what should have been completely unremarkable emails. At Claremont McKenna College, a Latina student wrote an essay about feeling like she didn't quite fit the mold of the typical student there. The dean of students, Mary Spellman, sent her a private supportive email saying she wanted to help students who don't fit our CMC mold. The student interpreted this single word, mold, in the absolute worst way possible, posted the email on social media, and the campus erupted in protests that ultimately led to the dean's resignation. Similarly, at Yale, an administrator sent a thoughtful email gently suggesting that maybe the university shouldn't dictate to students what Halloween costumes were appropriate. She was accused of racism and enabling violence. The protests that followed eventually drove both her and her husband to resign their university positions. In both cases, students took genuinely well-intentioned words from people who were trying to be allies, and, through the distorted lens of an us versus them worldview, interpreted them as hostile attacks from enemies. So if these three great untruths are so obviously harmful, why did they suddenly explode on college campuses, starting around 2013? The authors identify 6 interconnected trends that came together to create a perfect storm. First, rising political polarization. Since the 1990s, the political left and right in America have grown to genuinely despise each other. This has fueled an outrage industry in the media, where each side gleefully highlights the absolute worst behavior from the other, creating this vicious cycle of mutual provocation. Universities, widely seen as liberal strongholds, became prime targets for right-wing media, which in turn radicalized some students on the left. Second, and this might be the most important factor, there's been a dramatic surge in adolescent anxiety and depression. Starting around 2011, teenagers' mental health took a sudden, dramatic nosedive, with girls especially affected. The authors point to overwhelming evidence linking this crisis to the exact moment when smartphones and social media became completely ubiquitous in young teens' lives. Social media isn't just a harmless distraction. It replaces real-world interaction, exposes girls to constant social comparison and relational aggression, and robs them of sleep. This new generation, which the authors call iGen, born after 1995, arrived on campus far more anxious and depressed than previous generations, making them much more receptive to the false promises of safety ISM. Third, there's been a rise in paranoid parenting. Ever since the high-profile child abductions of the 1980s, parents have become increasingly fearful, even as actual crime rates plummeted to historic lows. This paranoia led to the rise of helicopter parenting, where children's lives get micromanaged and they're protected from every imaginable risk. Fourth, this paranoia directly caused the decline of free play. Unsupervised, somewhat risky play isn't just fun and games. It's absolutely essential for healthy child development. It's how kids learn to manage fear, resolve conflicts on their own, and become genuinely self-reliant. But iGen has been largely deprived of this crucial experience, their time instead packed with structured activities and screen time in what the authors call the great resume arms race to get into a prestigious college. Fifth, there's been explosive growth of campus bureaucracy. As universities transformed into more corporate-style institutions and students became more like customers, a massive administrative layer grew up, focused on things like risk management and student services. This bureaucracy, driven by a cover-your-behind mentality, proved all too willing to create policies and offices, like bias response teams, that reinforced the culture of safety ISM. And finally, there's a new quest for justice. Today's students have grown up witnessing real, undeniable injustices, from viral videos of police brutality to the revelations of the Me Too movement. This has fueled an intense, passionate desire for social justice. But the authors draw a crucial distinction between two kinds of justice. The first kind seeks equality of opportunity, working to remove barriers so everyone gets a fair shot. The second seeks equality of outcomes, insisting that if any group isn't represented in a field in exact proportion to their share of the population, it's automatic proof of systemic injustice. This second approach, while coming from a place of genuine compassion, can lead to a worldview that sees oppression absolutely everywhere and shuts down any inquiry into alternative explanations, treating differing opinions not as honest mistakes, but as evidence of evil intent. When you weave these 6 threads together, the full picture comes into sharp focus. A generation raised to be more fearful and less resilient arrived at politically polarized universities run by risk-averse bureaucracies, all while being constantly immersed in an outrage-fueling social media environment. It's really no wonder the 3 great untruths found such incredibly fertile ground. But here's the good news. The book doesn't end on that depressing note. The authors firmly believe these trends can be reversed. They offer a compelling vision for what they call wising up. For parents, it means actively rejecting paranoid parenting and giving children back the precious gift of unsupervised play and real independence, preparing them for the road ahead, not trying to smooth every bump in the road. It means teaching them the basic tools of CBT so they can learn to master their own thoughts instead of being enslaved by them. And it means modeling intellectual humility and what's called the principle of charity, teaching children to see common humanity in others instead of dividing the world into friends and enemies. For universities, it means recommitting to their fundamental purpose, their core reason for existing, the fearless pursuit of truth. It means adopting strong policies on free expression, like the famous Chicago Statement, actively promoting viewpoint diversity instead of groupthink, and teaching students the actual skills of productive disagreement rather than just shutting down debate. It means drawing a larger circle that includes everyone in a community genuinely dedicated to fearless inquiry. Ultimately, the message is one of profound hope and empowerment. We are not fragile porcelain dolls. Our feelings are not infallible guides to reality. And life is not a simplistic battle between absolutely good people and purely evil ones. By understanding and embracing these deeper truths, we can begin building stronger minds, healthier communities, and a genuinely wiser society. The Coddling of the American Mind is one of those genuinely rare books that fundamentally changes how you see the world around you. It's not an angry political rant from one side of the aisle. It's not a crotchety complaint about kids these days. Instead, it's a deeply empathetic and meticulously researched diagnosis of our current cultural moment. The authors act as wise, compassionate guides, helping us understand that many of the troubling trends we're witnessing, the rising anxiety, the intense political division, the hair-trigger culture of outrage, aren't the fault of one particular generation. They're the unintended consequences of good intentions that went seriously awry, of a society that, in its sincere effort to protect its children, has inadvertently made them more psychologically vulnerable. The most powerful lesson for me is this concept of anti-fragility, the revolutionary idea that we actually need challenges, setbacks, and even small doses of difficulty and pain to grow stronger, flies directly in the face of the culture of safety ISM. It reminds us that resilience isn't some magical quality you're either born with or without. It's something you actively build, like developing a muscle, through real experience and practice. The peanut allergy story serves as the perfect metaphor for our entire cultural moment. In our well-intentioned attempt to create a perfectly sterile, risk-free bubble for our children, we may actually be crippling their psychological immune systems, leaving them completely unprepared for the beautiful, messy, and challenging world that's waiting for them. So how can we actually apply this wisdom in our own lives, starting right now, today? First, the next time you feel that immediate flash of anger or offense at something someone says, I want you to try a simple experiment. Just pause for a moment. Instead of automatically trusting that initial feeling, practice what's called the principle of charity. Ask yourself this question: what's the most generous, reasonable interpretation of what that person just said? Like Kareth Foster in that chaotic hospital emergency room, you might discover that what felt like deliberate malice was actually just a simple misunderstanding. By consciously choosing a more generous interpretation, you open the door to genuine connection instead of unnecessary conflict. Second, start embracing discomfort as your personal tool for growth. Van Jones, the political commentator, once told a group of college students something brilliant. I don't want you to be safe ideologically. I don't want you to be safe emotionally. I want you to be strong. He urged them to treat challenging ideas like weights in a gym. This week, actively seek out an opportunity to enter that intellectual gym. Find a thoughtful conversation with someone you genuinely disagree with, not to win some argument or change their mind, but simply to listen carefully and understand their perspective. You'll grow noticeably stronger from the exercise. Finally, regardless of your age, you can start preparing yourself for the actual road ahead, instead of demanding the road be prepared for you. If you're a parent, this might mean letting your child walk to a friend's house alone for the very first time, even though it feels scary. If you're a young person, it might mean taking on a genuinely new challenge without immediately asking for help the second things get difficult. Chief Justice John Roberts once told a group of middle school graduates something beautifully counterintuitive. We all need to experience a little bad luck, a little betrayal, and a little loneliness to truly learn the real value of good fortune, loyalty, and friendship. These difficult experiences aren't signs that you're failing at life. They're actually the essential curriculum of life itself. That was a summary of The Coddling of the American Mind by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. We've explored the core ideas together today, but here's the truth. A summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful, fascinating country. The real adventure only begins when you actually decide to travel there yourself. If anything we've discussed has genuinely sparked your curiosity or challenged your thinking in some way, I really encourage you to pick up your own copy of the book. It's not just another read to add to your list. It's a transformative experience that offers a clearer, sharper lens through which to view our confusing times. And more importantly, it's a deeply practical guide to becoming a wiser, stronger, and more resilient person. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if this journey through a genuinely great book has been valuable to you, please take just a moment to like this video and subscribe to Billionaire's Bookshelf. That way, you won't miss out on our next deep dive into another book that genuinely has the power to change your life. Let's continue this journey of learning and growing together.